Good afternoon. Today I'm bringing you a story that will make your blood boil. A story of theft, of exploitation, of corporations stealing what isn't theirs and calling it invention. They call it intellectual property. Indigenous communities call it biopiracy. But let's call it what it actually is: biological colonialism.
Today, we expose the pharmaceutical giants and biotech corporations who are patenting traditional medicines that have been used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The Hindus and their 13,000-year-old Ayurvedic system, the San people of Africa and their Hoodia cactus, the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and their sacred plants. The indigenous peoples of Amazon and their sacred plants, and the list goes on.
These companies didn't discover these medicines. They didn't invent them. They stole them, repackaged them, and now they're making billions, while indigenous communities that preserve the knowledge for millennia get nothing. Worse than nothing. They face harm and consequences if they try to use their own traditional medicines.
This is the story of the greatest heist in modern history. It's happening right now, across every continent, targeting the world's most vulnerable communities, including the world's oldest living civilization, Sanatana Hindu Dharma. So let's begin.
First, let me explain what is biopiracy, because Western media loves to use euphemisms. They call it bioprospecting, they call it research and development, they call it innovation. But let's cut through the corporate speak.
Biopiracy is biological theft. It's what corporations from wealthy nations go to indigenous communities, the Hindus, the indigenous peoples of Africa, Asia, Latin America, Oceania, study their traditional medicines, take samples of their plants, and then return home to patent them as their own discoveries. And here's how the scam works.
Step 1: the extraction. Corporate researchers or universities approach indigenous communities, sometimes with permission, often without. They ask about traditional medicines. They take plant samples. They document indigenous knowledge that's been passed down for generations, in some cases for over 13,000 years.
Step 2, the laboratory. Back in their labs, they isolate the active compounds. They may modify them slightly, or they may not. They create formulations that are essentially identical to what indigenous peoples have been using for millennia.
Step 3, the patent. Here's what it gets. They file patent applications claiming they've invented or discovered something new. The patent offices in the United States, Europe, and Japan, they grant these patents. Why? Because they don't recognize indigenous knowledge as prior art.
Step 4, the monopoly. Once they have the patent, these corporations own exclusive rights to manufacture and sell that medicine for 20 years. They charge exorbitant prices, they make billions in profits, and if indigenous communities try to use or sell their own traditional medicines, indigenous people are likely to be prevented from using their own ancestral medicines.
And step 5, the exploitation continues. The profits from these patents fund further extraction, mining operations, logging, destruction of indigenous lands. The same corporations use their biopiracy profits to further exploit and destroy the very communities that they stole from. This isn't innovation. This is theft with a patent stamp.
Let's start with the Hindus, because the Hindu civilization represented perhaps the most egregious case of biopiracy in human history. Understanding Hindu indigenous identity. Before we go further, let me make something absolutely clear. When I say Hindus, I'm talking about Sanatana Hindu Dharma, the eternal cosmic order that existed for over 13,000 years.
Hindus are indigenous people. They are inheritors of the world's oldest living civilization. Their sacred texts, the Vedas, the Agamas, the Tantras, contain knowledge systems that predate modern nations by millennia.
Ayurveda, the Hindu system of medicine, is 13,000 years old. When Western pharmaceutical companies were still centuries away from existence, Hindu rishis and vaidyas had already documented the medicinal properties of thousands of plants, minerals, and compounds.
This knowledge isn't written in laboratories. It was revealed through deep spiritual practices, tested over millennia, documented in Sanskrit texts, and preserved through unbroken lineages of practitioners.
And now, Western corporations are patenting it as their own discoveries.
Let's go into the first biggest example, the neem tree scandal. The neem tree, or Azadirachta indica, has been sacred to Hindus for over 5,000 years or more, and it's called the Sarva Roga Nivarani, the cure of all ailments. And there are several different medicines that have the same term, and this is among all these medicines that are able to cure a huge number of diseases. Hindu communities have used neem for everything, whether it is pest control, skin diseases, dental care, diabetes, purifying the air, or spiritual rituals. Ancient Ayurvedic texts like the Charaka Samhita and the Shushruta Samhita have documented the properties of neem in detail.
In 1994, the U.S. multinational corporation W.R. Grace partnered with U.S. Department of Agriculture and received a European patent for antifungal product derived from neem seeds.
Think about that. A sacred tree that Hindus have been using for millennia have now been patented by a foreign company. A tree whose properties are documented in ancient Sanskrit manuscripts. And this corporation have claimed it as though they have invented it and have found a way to use it.
Hindu communities and activists challenged this patent. It took 10 years of legal battles. Finally, in 2005, the European Patent Office revoked the patent. The verdict? There was no invention. Hindus had been using neem this way for millennia.
But here's what the media didn't tell you. Dozens of neem patents are still active in the United States and Japan. The theft continues.
Case number 2, turmeric. In 1995, 2 researchers at the University of Mississippi Medical Center received a U.S. patent for using turmeric, curcuma longa, or haridra in Sanskrit, to heal wounds.
Turmeric, the golden spice that has been used in Hindu households and Ayurveda for countless millennia. The documents are unprecedented. It's mentioned in the Atharva Veda. It's used in Hindu wedding ceremonies as a symbol of purity and auspiciousness. And every Hindu grandmother has used it for healing wounds, treating infections, and maintaining health. But apparently, 2 American researchers have discovered it in 1995.
Hindu activists and the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research challenged this patent. They provided ancient Sanskrit texts, Ayurvedic manuscripts, centuries of documented evidence from Hindu medicinal traditions. In 1997, the U.S. Patent Trademark Office revoked the patent, but the damage was done. Between 1995 and 1997, the patent was valid. It was used. It generated profits from the stolen Hindu knowledge.
And these aren't isolated incidents. This is a systematic assault of a millennia-old Hindu medical knowledge system. According to research, there have been more than 5,000 patents filed on Hindu medicinal plants in the US Patent Office alone. Let me give you a list. To start off with, Tulsi, the holy basil, Ashwagandha, documented in ancient Ayurvedic texts, now patented.
Brahmi, named after Brahma, the creator in Hindu cosmology, used for cognitive enhancement for thousands of years, now patented. Karela, or bitter gourd, used by Hindus for diabetes management, now patented.
Amla, the gooseberry, one of them most important herbs in Ayurveda, now patented, and jamun, used in Hindu medicine for millennia, also patented.
And gurmad, meaning sugar destroyer in Sanskrit, now patented by pharmaceutical companies.
The list goes on. Hundreds of Hindu medicinal plants have been biopirated and patented.
Basmati rice. Even Hindu foods are not safe. Basmati rice has been cultivated by Hindu communities for over 3,000 years. It's mentioned in ancient Hindu texts. It's used in sacred offerings and religious ceremonies.
Yet, Rice Tech, a US company, received a US patent for basmati rice in 1997. And they claimed to have developed something new.
After legal challenges, several claims were dropped, but Rice Tech still holds patents on hybrid varieties that use traditional Hindu germplasm. They're literally making money from seeds that Hindu farmers preserved for 3,000 years.
Here's the magnitude of this crime. The pharmaceutical industry, built on Ayurvedic knowledge, which is a 13,000-year-old Hindu medicinal science, at least according to the records we have now, is worth $115 billion globally. According to research, 40% of modern medicines trace back to indigenous herbal knowledge. A huge portion of that is Ayurvedic or Hindu knowledge. How much of that 115 billion goes to Hindu communities? How much goes to the traditional knowledge holders? How much of that $115 billion belongs to the lineage of Vaidyas who have preserved this knowledge for 13,000 of years?
Zero. Not a single dollar. Not a single cent. Western pharmaceutical corporations are making $115 billion from stolen Hindu knowledge, while Hindu communities get nothing.
Here's the cruel irony. While Western corporations patent Hindu medicines and make billions, the very Hindu communities and spiritual leaders who preserve this knowledge face relentless persecution.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nityananda Paramashivam, a Hindu guru and incarnation who has been reviving ancient Ayurvedic sciences and establishing the world's largest repository of Hindu knowledge, has faced relentless persecution, false accusations, and attempts to destroy this sacred revival.
Why? Because he represents everything that Western pharmaceutical corporations are despising and hating. An unbroken lineage of Hindu knowledge that cannot be controlled, that cannot be patented, and cannot be stolen.
The pattern is clear. Steal Hindu knowledge, patent it, profit from it, and persecute anyone who tries to preserve the authentic Hindu tradition.
Now, this patenting and biopiracy is not isolated only to Hindus. Let's travel to Africa, where African indigenous people are fighting the same battle.
The Hoodia cactus, grown in the Kalahari Desert, the San people of southern Africa have used it for thousands of years as an appetite suppressant during long hunting trips.
In the 1960s, South Africa's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research started researching the Hoodia plant, the cactus. They isolated the active compound, called it P57, and patented it in 1995.
The San people weren't consulted, they weren't compensated, they weren't even informed.
This council then licensed the P57 to Phytopharm, a British pharmaceutical company, for £21 million. Phytopharm sublicensed it to Pfizer, and the projected market, $3 billion annually.
Do you know what the San people got? Nothing. Not a cent. It wasn't until 2002, after international outrage and legal pressure, that the San people negotiated a benefit-sharing agreement. They would receive 8% of royalties and 6% of milestone payments if Hoodia products reached the market.
But by then, the patents were already filed. The theft was already complete. And when Hoodia products eventually failed commercially, the San people got nothing anyway.
The pattern is identical to what happened to Hindus. Extract the knowledge, patent it, profit from it, and if caught, negotiate a pittance while keeping the patent rights.
Another African plant, another case of biopiracy, the devil's claw, grows in southern Africa. Indigenous communities have used it to treat arthritis, fever, and pain.
European pharmaceutical companies discovered it. They patented extracts and formulations. Today, Devil's Claw products generate over 100 million pounds annually in Europe alone.
How much goes to the African communities? A fraction. Most harvesting is done by poverty-stricken communities who paid pittances by middlemen, while European companies make millions.
According to research, over 70% of pharmaceutical drugs are derived from or inspired by natural products, many from Africa.
Yet Africa receives less than 1% of global pharmaceutical revenues. The biodiversity of Africa is systematically mined, patented, and commercialized without fair compensation or consent from the communities that preserved this knowledge and this land.
Just like Hindu knowledge is being stolen, African indigenous knowledge faces the same colonial exploitation, dressed up in the language of innovation and intellectual property.
And next, the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the earth, home to countless indigenous nations and the target of the most aggressive biopiracy in the world.
Ayahuasca, the sacred vine used by indigenous peoples across the Amazon basin for spiritual ceremonies and healing for thousands of years. In 1986, an American entrepreneur named Lauren Miller obtained a U.S. plant patent on a variety of ayahuasca vine, calling it divine.
Think about the audacity. A plant that's sacred to dozens of indigenous nations, used in religious ceremonies, central to their spiritual practices, and an American claims that he discovered it, and he gets a patent. In 1999, the coordinating body of indigenous organizations of the Amazon basin challenged this patent. They called it what it was: biopiracy and cultural appropriation.
The battle went on for years. The patent was rejected in 1999, then reinstated in 2001 on technical grounds, and finally expired in 2003.
But here's what matters. For 17 years, an American held a patent on a sacred indigenous plant. That patent could have been used to restrict indigenous practices, commercialize their sacred ceremonies, and generate profits from their spiritual heritage.
This is exactly what's happening to Hindus. Sacred Hindu plants like Tulasi, Rudraksha, and others face the same threat of commercialization and patent theft.
Now, another case. The curare is a plant extract used by indigenous people of the Amazon as a hunting poison to blow darts.
Various tribes knew about its muscle-relaxing properties for centuries. Pharmaceutical companies isolated the active compounds. Today, curare derivatives are used as muscle relaxants in surgery. The global market for these drugs is worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually.
The indigenous communities who preserved this knowledge for generations, they received nothing. Their knowledge was just extracted, patented, and commercialized without consent or compensation.
Moving south to the Andes, the indigenous people of Peru have cultivated maca root for over 2,000 years. They use it for energy, fertility, and nutrition. Between 2000 and 2002, Pure World Botanicals and other companies filed multiple U.S. patents on maca extracts and formulations.
Peruvian indigenous communities and civil society groups denounced this as biopiracy. And they were right. These patents were based entirely traditional Andean knowledge. The maca industry today is worth over $200 million annually. Andean communities see only a tiny fraction of these profits, while foreign companies with patent reap the benefits.
The same story repeats with quinoa, with various medicinal plants, with traditional crops. The Andean region has become a biopiracy hotspot, according to indigenous organizations.
And this pattern is global. There is no indigenous community that is safe from it. For example, kava, Piper methisticum, has been used by Pacific Island communities for ceremonial and medicinal purposes for over 3,000 years.
Multiple pharmaceutical companies have filed patents on kava extracts for anxiety and sleep disorders. The Pacific Island communities that preserved this knowledge receive no compensation.
Traditional Chinese medicine has documented over 100,000 of traditional medicine formulations spanning thousands of years. Yet foreign companies continue to file patents, modify these versions, and make their own formulations. The same colonial playbook: extract, patent, and profit.
Aboriginal Australians have over 65,000 years of continuous culture, among the oldest living cultures on Earth. Yet, their traditional medicines, their traditional knowledge of native plants, all are being studied, documented, and increasingly patented by pharmaceutical and biotech companies.
And what's more, we are seeing that no community has faced the scale of systematic theft that Hindu civilization has endured. 13,000 years of Ayurvedic knowledge has systematically been stolen, patented, and commercialized.
Now, let me explain how these corporations use patent profits for further exploitation of indigenous communities, including Hindu communities.
Now, step number 1, patent the medicines. Extract traditional knowledge from Hindus and other indigenous people, patent it, and make billions.
Step 2, fund extraction industries. Use those billions to fund mining operations, logging companies, and agribusiness on indigenous lands, including lands sacred to the Hindu population.
Step number 3, destroy ecosystems. The same lands that provide the medicinal plants are destroyed. Forests are cleared, rivers are polluted, biodiversity is eliminated. Sacred groves that Hindus have protected for millennia are destroyed.
Step 4, displace communities. Indigenous peoples, including Hindu communities, are forced off their land. Their temples are destroyed, their adinams are attacked, their way of life is ended.
And step number 5, with the communities displaced and the ecosystems destroyed, now bridges are broken. Future generation tradition of Ayurveda is threatened.
Step 6, complete the monopoly. Now the corporations don't just have patents on traditional knowledge, they have a complete monopoly. Indigenous communities can't access their own medicines because their plants no longer exist on their lands, and the knowledge has been systematically erased.
Finally, step number 7, persecute the knowledge keepers. If any Hindu leader or indigenous elder tries to preserve and revive this knowledge, they face persecution, false accusations, legal harassment, and systematic attempts to destroy their work.
This is exactly what happened to the
solution. What is the hope? Is there any resistance or way forward? This is where enters the United Ancient Enlightened Indigenous Nations, the UAN, established by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Nityananda Paramashivam.
This is an intergovernmental organization uniting over 160 indigenous nations across 7 regions. And we are fighting back against biopiracy and the systematic theft of indigenous knowledge.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism recognized that Western institutions refused. Hindus are indigenous people. The Hindu civilization, with millennia-year-old knowledge systems, face the same colonial exploitation as indigenous people in Africa, in the Americas, and Oceania.
The difference, the scale. No other indigenous community has had as much knowledge systematically stolen and patented as the Hindu community.
The UAN brings together Hindu communities and indigenous nations worldwide under a common cause, protecting traditional knowledge, reclaiming sovereignty, and ensuring that the benefits of ancestral wisdoms flow back to the communities that preserved it.
So let's understand what UAN is actually doing. First, it's working with UAN is helping indigenous communities, including Hindu communities, patent their own traditional knowledge, not to commercialize it aggressively, but to protect it, to prevent corporations from stealing it. When Hindus hold patents on Ayurvedic formulations, Western corporations can't steal them. When African communities hold patents on their traditional medicines, Big Pharma can't claim ownership. This is defensive innovation, protecting ancestral knowledge from theft.
The UAN also provides any support for indigenous communities fighting biopiracy cases. They're taking on pharmaceutical giants in several different examples across the world. They're challenging existing patents, and we're fighting for bringing justice to all the biopiracy claims that are being made by spreading the awareness and educating people on the cases that are ongoing across the world.
UAN is creating a global database of indigenous knowledge with a major focus on the 13,000-year-old Ayurvedic system and other Hindu knowledge systems. This documentation serves as evidence of prior art, preventing corporations from filing new patents on stolen knowledge. But unlike previous efforts, UAN's documentation is controlled by indigenous communities themselves. It's not handed over to patent offices in Western countries. It remains under indigenous sovereignty.
In several different ways, through benefit sharing frameworks, land protection, economic empowerment, the UAN is entering into the scene when it comes to biopiracy and outright discrimination against indigenous rights. But here's what mainstream media won't tell you, that indigenous knowledge is sacred and will survive no matter what. These indigenous knowledge is established by indigenous systems itself and based on authentic research, and they're training new generations to understand the indigenous knowledge, protecting the indigenous knowledge, the resources, the nature, and they're creating a parallel system that cannot be controlled or exploited by pharmaceutical corporations.
And UAN has established its own health organization, the World Health Organization for Ancient Nations, that recognizes and legitimizes indigenous medical systems with Ayurveda and Siddha as a cornerstone. This
is crucial
because the World Health Organization for Ancient Nations, provides an alternative to mainstream medicines that respects 13,000 years old of Hindu medical traditions as equal, if not superior, to modern medicine.
The UAN isn't just defensive. It is actively playing a role in forging a new civilizational model where Hindus and other indigenous people control their own knowledge, where traditional medicines are protected from biopiracy, where communities benefit economically from their ancestral wisdom, sacred plants and lands are reserved and preserved, and knowledge keepers are honored, not persecuted.
This is indigenous sovereignty in action. This is an alternative to 500 years of colonial exploitation. And it has been led by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Srinityananda Paramashivam, the only voice for indigenous people who is standing in. If this was about access, indigenous communities would benefit. They don't. This is about profit. This is about power. This is about the continuation of colonialism by other means.
For centuries, Western powers colonized lands, extracted resources, enslaved populations, destroyed temples, burned libraries, and called it civilization. They destroyed the Nalanda University, which is the world's first residential university, as a center of traditional indigenous knowledge. They burned it for 3 whole months, where millions of manuscripts turned to ash.
They destroyed Takshashila, another Hindu center of learning where Ayurveda was taught for over 2,500 years.
They looted Hindu temples containing libraries of medical texts.
And now they're patenting what they couldn't completely destroy before. The knowledge that survived in the museum, in the memories of gurus, in the practices of Vaidyas, in the oral traditions of the Hindu communities. Now they're stealing that too.
millennia-year-old Ayurvedic wisdom, $115 billion pharmaceutical industry, zero compensation to indigenous communities.
But Hindus and indigenous peoples around the world are fighting back. From the Amazon to the Kalahari, from the Himalayas to the Pacific Islands, indigenous communities are saying no more. Our knowledge is not your property. Our plants are not your products. Our heritage is not your patent.
International intergovernmental organizations like the United Ancient Enlightened Indigenous Nations are providing a platform, the resources, and the unity that indigenous communities worldwide need to resist biopiracy and reclaim sovereignty.
The question now is, will the rest of the world stand with indigenous communities, or will we continue to allow the greatest theft in history?
We know where we stand. We stand with KAILASA and millennia-year-old Hindu wisdom. We stand with indigenous sovereignty and with the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. The fight against biopiracy continues, however, and it needs you too. We urge all of the viewers to get involved. If you have your opinion or you want to voice it out, do comment below and join the conversation that we had today about biopiracy.
And if you would like to learn more, you can scan the QR code and visit kailasa.org. You can become a part of the United Ancient Nations, a part of this intergovernmental organization to protect indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge, indigenous systems. And we urge each one of you to get involved, whether it's through your time, talent, or treasure. And we do request that you hit subscribe, like, and comment, and learn more about the indigenous systems which have been around for millennia.
Until next time, this has been another segment on KAILASA News. Thank you.